He became Duke. But he still wanted her. The sheep was not moving. Arthur Pendergast had his boots in 6 inches of ditch water, his coat on the wrong bank, and his patience approximately where his coat was, and the sheep a large, committed merino with the expression of an animal that had made a philosophical decision and intended to maintain it, was looking at him from the middle of the ditch with the serenity of something that had nowhere better to be. "Move," Arthur said. The sheep did not move. He got his hands under it and lifted, which was the 3rd time he had done this, and the sheep came free of the mud with a sound like an argument ending badly, and he deposited it on the bank and straightened and put his hands on his knees and looked at the October sky over Shropshire with the expression of a man entirely content with his life. Cold air. Good work. A ditch that was now 1 sheep lighter. This was the work. This was the life he had chosen at 22 when he had left the court and the expectations and everything that came with being the 3rd son of a 3rd son of an old moorland name, and he had not regretted it for a single morning in 10 years. Not once. He was repeating this to himself with some emphasis when the rider arrived. He came across the field at speed, which meant official business, because nobody came across a Shropshire field at speed in October for social reasons, and the envelope he produced from his coat was sealed with black wax, which meant something worse than official. Arthur opened it. He read it twice. He looked at the sheep, which had settled onto the dry grass with the magnificent indifference of something that had been rescued and felt no obligation to be grateful. "Right," he said. The letter informed him, in the formal language of solicitors who had been looking for him for 3 weeks, that his cousin Edmund had died without issue, his uncle before that, and his father's brother's line before that, and that the dukedom of Moorland had descended through its collateral branches with the systematic determination of water finding the lowest point until it had arrived, inevitably and apparently inexorably, at one Arthur Pendergast, veterinary surgeon, currently residing in a rented farmhouse near Ludlow and knee-deep in a drainage ditch. He was the Duke of Moorland. Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden beauty and unexpected love, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories where pain shatters and true character shines through. And if you'd like, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and your presence makes these stories come alive. He had an estate of 40,000 acres. He had a townhouse in Mayfair. He had a house in Somerset, a house in Derbyshire, and the legendary Moorland racing stables, which were considered among the finest in England and which were, the solicitor's letter noted with the particular emphasis of a man flagging the most pressing element of a complex situation, currently being managed in his absence by Lady Beatrice Alcott. Arthur put the letter back in the envelope. He picked up his coat from the far bank. He looked at the sheep one last time. "You have," he told it, "very poor timing." The sheep closed its eyes. He left for Moorland 2 days later, which was as fast as a man could arrange his affairs when his affairs included 17 patients of various species, a landlord who needed 4 weeks' notice, and the particular interior resistance of someone who has built a good life and been told by fate that it is required elsewhere. He sent 3 letters ahead of him, one to the solicitor, one to the house, one to the stables, and he sat in the hired carriage with his coat that had seen better decades and his calloused hands and his 10 years of country living, and he thought about what the solicitor's letter had contained in its final line. The stables are in excellent condition under Lady Beatrice Alcott's management, who has overseen operations for the past 4 years in anticipation of the new Duke's arrival. Lady Beatrice has expressed willingness to brief the incoming Duke on all current arrangements. Willingness. He had read that word 4 times. It had the quality of something carefully chosen. He had not spoken to Beatrice Alcott in 10 years. He had thought about her more often than that, which was a separate issue he had managed with varying success over the course of a decade and did not intend to examine in a hired carriage on the road to Moorland. He arrived at the estate on a Thursday afternoon in late October, which was grey and cold and entirely in keeping with his mood. The house was as he remembered it from childhood visits, long and golden and serious, the kind of building that communicated permanence without effort, surrounded by the kind of grounds that required an army to maintain and apparently had one, judging by the evidence of recent work on the East Gardens. His new valet appointed, apparently, in advance of his arrival by the solicitor, because the solicitor was the kind of man who solved problems before they fully formed, was waiting at the front door with the expression of someone who had been briefed on the incoming Duke and was doing his professional best. The valet's name was Harris. He was 50, precise, and took one look at Arthur's coat and said nothing, which told Arthur that Harris was either diplomatic or despairing, and that both were possible. "Your Grace," Harris said. "Arthur," Arthur said. Harris's expression communicated, with perfect efficiency, that this was not how dukes were addressed and that he would require time to adjust his approach. The house is ready. Will you be taking dinner at 7? Is Lady Alcott here? Lady Beatrice is at the stables, sir. She generally is, at this hour. I'll go to the stables first." Harris looked at the coat. "Perhaps after." "Stables first," Arthur said, and left Harris on the front step communicating silently with the October sky. He knew the way to the stables. He had known the way since he was 12, which was when he had first come to Moorland with his father and discovered that the horses were more interesting than the house and the stables were more interesting than the horses, because in the stables there was a girl of 12 who knew every horse by name and could tell you their history going back 3 generations, and who had looked at him when he couldn't correctly identify a chestnut gelding and said, with the particular precision of someone who has never understood why other people are less interested in accurate information than she is, "That's a thoroughbred cross, not a standard chestnut, you can see it in the cannon bone length." He had been looking at her, in one way or another, ever since. The stables at Moorland were large, well kept, and occupied. He heard the voice before he saw her, clear and carrying, the voice of someone giving instructions that are meant to be followed the first time, and when he came through the main stable door he found exactly what the solicitor's letter had failed to prepare him for, which was Beatrice Alcott with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her dark hair pinned efficiently rather than elegantly, and her entire attention directed at the head groom with the focused intensity of someone who has made a decision and is explaining it precisely once. She had not heard him come in. She was 31 now. 10 years since Edinburgh, 10 years since the conversation in the garden at Moorland that he had spent a subsequent decade examining from various angles and finding himself, each time, having done the wrong thing for reasons that had seemed right at the time. He looked for the word and found several and discarded them, entirely herself. That was the word. She had always been entirely herself, which was the thing about her that had undone him at 21 and appeared, from a stable doorway in October, to be perfectly intact. The head groom saw Arthur first and straightened. Beatrice followed his gaze. She turned. 10 years in a second. He watched her absorb it, the same way he was absorbing it, the particular rearrangement of the present tense when someone who has been living in the past tense of your memory walks through a door and becomes real again. Then her expression settled into something that was not quite neutral but was doing a very competent impression of it. "Mr. Pendergast," she said. He stopped. "Arthur is fine. I'm aware of what it is," she said. "I was making a point." She turned to the groom. "We'll continue this tomorrow, Thomas. Give Constellation her feed at 5. She rolled her sleeves down with the brisk efficiency of someone transitioning between tasks, and looked at Arthur with the measuring attention of a woman who has had 4 years to prepare for this moment and has used them well. "You'll want the accounts," she said. "I have them in the office. The race season ends in 3 weeks. Constellation is our best prospect for the November stakes. I'd recommend Beatrice," he said. "Lady Beatrice," she said, pleasantly, firmly. "We should be accurate, since we're establishing things." He looked at her. She looked at him. Around them the horses moved in their boxes and the stable smelled of hay and horses and the particular October combination of cold air and warm animals, and he felt, with the complete and humbling certainty of someone who has been a duke for approximately 4 hours, that he was standing in her territory. "Lady Beatrice," he said. "It's good to see you. I'll have the accounts ready at 9 tomorrow morning," she said. "Welcome to Moorland, Your Grace." She walked past him toward the stable door, and she did not look back, and her hem was muddy, and she moved with the particular confidence of someone who knows exactly where she is going in every sense. He stood in the stable doorway and watched her go and thought, with a clarity that 10 years and a dukedom had done absolutely nothing to reduce, there it is. There she was. Chapter 2. The accounts were precise, thorough, and entirely damning to any illusion he might have had that the stables needed him. Arthur sat in the estate office at 9 on Friday morning and read through 4 years of records that told the story of a woman who had taken a good operation and made it excellent breeding decisions documented with scientific rigor, bloodline analyses he would have been proud of, veterinary notes that showed a depth of practical knowledge that put his professional training to a specific and pointed kind of shame. The Constellation purchase, he said, looking at a record from 2 years ago. You bought her for 40 guineas. She was undervalued, Beatrice said, from the other side of the desk. She was in her working clothes again, the practical dress, the pinned hair, the rolled sleeves, and she had brought the accounts herself rather than sending them, which he was choosing not to read too much into. Her dam was from a French line that the previous owner didn't recognize. I did. Where did you learn the French bloodlines? I read, she said, with the mild precision of someone who considers this self-evident. He turned to the veterinary section. Marsh fever, 3 cases, all resolved without loss. How? Early isolation and the drainage improvement I implemented in the south paddock. She turned a page in her own copy. The drainage was contributing to standing water in the paddock. I redirected it in the spring of 1768. No recurrence since. He looked at her. You redirected the drainage. The estate carpenter and I. Yes. How did you know that was the source? I observed the pattern. She met his eyes steadily. I have been observing these stables for 4 years. I know every variable. He closed the accounts. He leaned back in the chair that was his chair, in his office, at his estate, and looked at the woman across from him who had done everything he was supposed to come here and do, and done it better than he would have, and felt the particular sensation of a man confronting an assessment of himself that is unflattering and accurate in equal measure. I owe you an apology, he said. The air in the office changed. She looked at him with the careful attention of someone who has thought about the possibility of this sentence for 10 years and has not permitted herself to assume it would arrive. The accounts, she said, not quite successfully. We should discuss the November stake strategy. Beatrice. He said it quietly. Not the formal Lady Beatrice of the stables. Just her name, which he had been careful with for the last 18 hours. I owe you an apology for Edinburgh. For the letter. For, he stopped, found the precise words, for deciding what you could and couldn't handle without asking you. She was very still. I left, he said, because I thought I had nothing to offer a lady. You had the court. The connections. The future that made sense. I was going to be a vet in the country and I told myself that was the right thing to go, to not ask you to reduce yourself. I know what you told yourself, she said, and her voice was level and her hands were flat on the desk. I read the letter, Arthur. I have read it several times over several years. She looked at him. You decided for me. Without asking me. You decided what I would want, what I would choose, what I was worth, and you left before I could contradict you. Yes, he said. And now you have a title and an estate and 40,000 acres and you've arrived and she stopped herself. Reorganized. And the November stakes is in 3 weeks and Constellation needs her final training schedule adjusted and these are the things that require discussion. They do, he said. We will discuss them. And this too. There is nothing further. There is 10 years further, he said. I'm not asking you to address it all today. I'm asking you to know that I know I was wrong, and that the accounting was mine, not yours. She looked at the accounts in her hands for a moment. Then she stood, and she was entirely composed, and she was also, he knew her well enough, had always known her well enough, not entirely composed, and the distinction mattered. The mare in the 3rd stall has a slight heat in her off-fore, she said. Since you're a vet, I'd value a second opinion. He stood. Show me, he said. They went to the stables, and she showed him the mare, and he ran his hands down the leg with the professional attention of 10 years' practice, and she watched him work with the focused interest of someone who respects competence regardless of everything else. And for 20 minutes in the third stall with the October light coming through the high windows, they were simply two people who knew about horses, finding the problem and discussing its solution. It was the most natural 20 minutes he had spent in 4 days. When they straightened and he confirmed her assessment, mild soft tissue inflammation, rest and cold compresses, no race work for a week, she nodded, and then looked at him with an expression that was not the managed composure of the office but something less arranged. "You're good," she said. "You always were. You're better," he said. At all of it. You know that." She looked away. "The accounts are on your desk," she said. "I'll have the November strategy document ready by Monday." She left the stall, and he watched her go the same way he had watched her the day before, with the specific awareness of a man who has been wrong about something for a long time and has only recently been permitted to know it, and the mare shifted in her box and looked at him with the philosophical equanimity of a horse that has seen this kind of thing before. "I know," he said, and went back to the house to attempt, again, to fit his calloused hands into the silk gloves his new valet was aggressively optimistic about. Chapter 3. The house party was his great-aunt Millicent's idea, which was the first sign it would be complicated. Lady Millicent Pendergast was 73, small, extremely sharp, and had opinions about the new Duke of Moreland's domestic arrangements that she communicated with the directness of someone who had lived long enough to have no further use for indirectness. She arrived on Wednesday unannounced, installed herself in the best guest room, dismissed Harris's carefully arranged schedule with a wave of her hand, and by Thursday afternoon had organized a weekend gala with the efficient enthusiasm of a woman who considers other people's social lives a project she has been assigned. "You need to be seen," she told Arthur, over a breakfast he had not finished. "The title requires it. The stables require it. The county expects the new Duke to entertain. The county," Arthur said, "can manage its expectations." "The county's expectations," Millicent said, "include seeing you married within a reasonable period, which means you must be seen and appraised by suitable candidates, which means a gala, which I have arranged for Saturday." "You've arranged it already. I've been here 2 days." She said this as if it explained everything, which it did. "I've invited 16 families. The barons from the East County, the Hawthorne family, they have 2 daughters, both very eligible, Lord Fairfax and his wife. Lady Beatrice Alcott is included in an advisory capacity regarding the racing demonstrations on Saturday afternoon." He looked at her. "An advisory capacity. She manages the stables." Millicent's expression was entirely innocent. "It would be inappropriate to exclude her. I've also arranged her accommodation." "Good. She can stay at the Village Inn. Is being fully renovated," Millicent said, with the perfect serenity of a woman who had possibly arranged this. "All rooms unavailable until December. She will stay in the East Guest Wing." She stood, collected her toast, and moved toward the door. "Breakfast at 8 on Saturday. Do try to wear the good coat." The good coat, it turned out, was what Harris considered good, which was a different category from what Arthur considered good, but he wore it on Saturday evening when the guests arrived and stood in the Moreland drawing room with a glass of wine and the expression of a man doing his professional duty, which was now, apparently, standing in well-lit rooms being appraised by the county. The débutantes arrived with their mothers and their prepared expressions and their carefully managed conversation, and they looked at him with the specific attention of young women who have been briefed on the Duke of Moreland's vital statistics: age, income, acreage, and Arthur stood among them and smiled at the appropriate moments and felt absolutely nothing, which was probably visible to anyone paying attention. Millicent was paying attention. Millicent was also watching the door. Beatrice came in at 7, which was the dinner hour, and she came in the way she did everything, without performance, without the arranged presentation of the débutantes, with the specific quality of someone who knows who she is and hasn't prepared a different version for the occasion. Millicent had apparently had opinions about her dress, because it was not her stable clothes, deep green silk, simply cut, and her hair was up properly, and she moved through the drawing-room doorway and Arthur had the experience of a man who has been standing in a room that was slightly too warm and bright and has suddenly registered why. He took a drink of wine. He took too large a drink of wine. Harris, who was passing with a tray, observed this with the discretion of an excellent valet. Beatrice was seated at dinner between Lord Fairfax and the local baron, a cheerful man named Harcourt who had known her since childhood and was clearly delighted to sit beside her, and she talked to both of them with the ease of someone who is genuinely interested in the people she's talking to, which was, he had always thought, one of her most infuriating qualities, not infuriating because it was bad but because it was good in a way that made everyone in her vicinity feel attended to. Including barons named Harcourt who were apparently very funny because she laughed at something he said with the Real laugh, the undignified one, and Arthur across the table of 12 found himself unable to remember what the young woman to his left had just asked him. "I'm sorry," he said. "What was that?" She repeated her question. He answered it. He did not look at Beatrice again for 4 minutes, which was an effort of will he considered respectable under the circumstances. After dinner, in the drawing room, Millicent circulated with the focused energy of a woman orchestrating something, and the young ladies demonstrated accomplishments at the pianoforte, and the men talked about hunting, and Arthur found himself at the window with a second glass of wine watching Baron Harcourt make Beatrice laugh again. He was not, he told himself, jealous. He was observant. He was paying attention to the room, as a host was required to do, and noting that Lady Beatrice Alcott was having an excellent evening, and that this was good, and that his hands were completely relaxed around the wine glass, which was definitely not white-knuckled. Millicent appeared at his elbow. "Lord Harcourt is a widower," she said, conversationally. Arthur said. 3 years since his wife passed. Very well thought of in the county. Excellent family." She paused. "He's always been fond of Beatrice. They rode together as children." "That's very interesting," Arthur said, in a tone that communicated it was not interesting but that he had no grounds to say why. "You should go and talk to her," Millicent said. "She's occupied." "She's been looking at the window for the last 5 minutes," Millicent said, with the mild precision of someone reporting simple facts. "That is, whenever you're not looking at her, she looks at you. When you're looking at her, she talks to Harcourt." She sipped her tea. "It's quite exhausting to watch." Arthur turned from the window. "Aunt Millicent. Did you arrange the village inn to be unavailable?" She looked at him with perfect innocence over her teacup. "The renovations were a county project. Nothing to do with me." He looked at her. "Go and talk to her, Arthur," she said. "You have waited quite long enough." He crossed the drawing room. Harcourt, who was a good man with excellent instincts, found a reason to speak to Lord Fairfax at the precise moment Arthur arrived, which Arthur noted with gratitude. Beatrice turned from the conversation to find him there and did the small, rapid internal reorganization he had learned to see. "Your Grace," she said. "Are you enjoying the evening?" he said, which was not the sentence he had intended to open with but was the one that arrived. "Baron Harcourt is very good company." She looked at him directly. "Are you enjoying the evening?" He looked at the room full of eligible women who had been presented to him this evening. "No," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, "Neither am I, particularly." They stood together at the edge of the drawing room while the party moved around them, and he thought of 10 years in Shropshire and the ditch and the sheep, and the solicitor's letter, and the road to Moorland, and the stables, and her back in the doorway, and he thought that he had been given, against all reasonable expectation, a second chance at the only thing he had never successfully talked himself out of wanting. He had not yet found the way to take it. But he was going to. Chapter 4. The storm came in at midnight on Saturday, off the Bristol Hills, and the stallion went through the paddock fence at 12:30, which Harris discovered when the night groom arrived at the house door with a lantern and the expression of a man delivering news he wishes he were delivering to someone else. Arthur was already dressed, because he had not been asleep, and he went down to the stable yard before Harris had finished explaining the situation. The fence at the north paddock was down, the wind had taken a section and Sovereign, the prize stallion and their primary race asset, had gone through it into the east fields in the dark and the rain. He was taking a lantern and a halter from the tack room when Beatrice came through the stable yard door in her riding coat with her own lantern and a lead rope. They looked at each other. He'll go to the East Water Trough, she said. He always does when he's loose. There's a shelter near the shepherd's hut field. I know the shepherd's hut, he said. Then let's go. They went into the storm together, which was no gentle autumn rain but the committed, horizontal variety that soaked through a good coat in 6 minutes and reduced a lantern to a closely guarded argument with the wind. The east fields were dark and wet, and Arthur counted on his knowledge of the estate grounds and Beatrice's knowledge of Sovereign's habits, and both turned out to be reliable, because they found the stallion at the East Water Trough exactly as she had predicted, standing in the rain with the philosophical composure of a horse that has had an adventure and is now prepared to be retrieved. Sovereign knew Beatrice. He came to her hand with the calm of long familiarity, and she got the lead rope on him and spoke to him quietly, and Arthur held his own lantern up against the wind and watched her work and thought for the second time in as many days that the word for her was entirely herself. They could not get back before the storm closed in entirely. The shepherd's hut was 30 yards away, stone-built, solid, used in lambing season and now empty except for a stack of dry hay, a low wooden bench, and a fireplace that had enough timber beside it to be useful. They got Sovereign into the small attached pen, which was dry and adequate, and they went inside, and Arthur got the fire going with the focus of a man who has made fires in worse conditions, and Beatrice wrung water from her coat and sat on the bench and pushed her wet hair back from her face, and they looked at each other in the firelight with the rain coming hard against the stone walls. "He's fine," she said. "Sovereign. The cold won't hurt him for a night." "Good," Arthur said. He sat on the other end of the bench, which was not long, and the fire was building warmth into the small space with the efficiency of a small room. He took off his outer coat, which was comprehensively wet. She had her coat on still, which was marginally less wet. They sat in silence for a moment. The rain was very loud. "Edinburgh," he said. She looked at the fire. "I've been trying to find the right time," he said. "There isn't a right time. There's just time." He turned to face her. "I told myself I left for your sake. Because I had nothing to offer. Because you deserved better than a life in the country with a man who had chosen mud over quartz." He paused. "That was real, what I believed. But it wasn't the whole truth." She was very still. "The whole truth," he said, "was that I was 22 and I was afraid. You were already everything, Beatrice. Already yourself, already certain, already the person who could identify a French bloodline from a cannon bone and argue with grooms and manage things that needed managing. And I was going to Edinburgh to learn things you already knew by instinct, and I was afraid that if I asked you to wait, or to come, or to choose me, you would, and that I would spend the rest of my life being less than what you chose." The fire cracked. Outside, the rain continued its opinion. "So you chose for me," she said. Not with anger, the anger had been 10 years ago, she supposed. This was something more settled and more sad. "You decided I would eventually agree with you. I decided," he said, "that you would be better served by a clean ending than a long diminishment." He looked at his hands, the calloused veterinarian's hands in the firelight. "I was wrong. I knew I was wrong approximately 3 months after Edinburgh. I have known it with increasing certainty for 10 years. She said nothing. "I did not come back," he said, "because I had nothing to come back with. I was a vet in the country. I was the thing I had chosen over you, and I had made that choice, and coming back empty-handed to say I regretted it seemed worse than staying away." "It would have been worse," she said, quietly. "Then." He looked at her. "And now?" She looked at the fire for a long moment. Then she looked at him, and she was 31 and entirely herself and entirely not what he deserved and possibly willing to be here in a shepherd's hut in a rainstorm and say the thing that had been true for as long as the other thing had. "You came back with a dukedom," she said. "Which I don't care about. I know. And with the capacity to correctly diagnose a soft tissue inflammation in a mare's off 4, which I do care about. I know that too. And with an apology," she said, "which is 10 years late and also the first honest thing you've said to me since you left." She paused. "That I care about." He was looking at her with the full, direct attention of a man who has stopped managing the distance. "Beatrice." "Don't," she said. "Not yet." She turned back to the fire. I have spent 4 years running your family's stables and building something real and being entirely fine, and you have been in Shropshire in a ditch, and I need a moment before you say whatever you're about to say. He said nothing. The rain said everything that needed saying for the next several minutes, and the fire settled into its work, and Sovereign moved in the pen outside with the quiet of a horse that has been caught and is warm and has no further concerns. She had one blanket from the emergency shelf, rough wool, the kind kept for lambing, and she put it around her shoulders and then, without looking at him, held out one side of it. He moved closer on the bench. She put the blanket around both of them. They sat that way, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder against his, looking at the fire, with the rain loud outside and the 10 years between them finally, quietly, beginning to close. I managed the stables, she said eventually, because they needed managing. Not for you. I know, he said. And if you had stayed in Shropshire and never become Duke, they would have continued to be managed. I know that too. But, she said, and she stopped. But, he said, very carefully. But I am not unhappy, she said, slowly, with the precision of someone choosing exact words, that it is you who came through the stable door on Thursday. He looked at the side of her face. She was looking at the fire. The blanket was warm around both of them and the storm was wild outside and he was closer to her than he had been in 10 years and she had just said, in her precise, careful, entirely Beatrice way, that she was glad he was here. He did not kiss her. Not yet. Not in a shepherd's hut at 1 in the morning after a storm, when they had barely begun to dismantle 10 years and there was a race in 2 days and everything still to be said. But he did not move away, and she did not move away, and they sat together under a lambing blanket with the fire doing its work, and the gap between them had been crossed in the only way it could be, not with a grand gesture, but with two people sitting close enough to be warm and choosing not to move. The November stakes, he said eventually. Constellation is ready, she said. I know. I reviewed the training records. What did you think? I think you're going to win, he said. She turned and looked at him, and they were very close, and her expression was the real one, unmanaged, the one he remembered and had been reconstructing from memory for 10 years. She said. We're going to win. He looked at her. He agreed. Outside, the storm began very slowly, as storms eventually do, to reconsider. Chapter 5. The morning of the November stakes was cold, clear, and full of people who had opinions about the Duke of Moreland. They arrived at the Moreland race grounds from 6 counties, the county families and the racing interests and the tons representatives who had heard about the new Duke and come to appraise him, and with them the women Millicent had assembled for Saturday's gala who had found reasons to extend their visits and were now distributed through the viewing stands with the expressions of people who have placed a specific kind of bet. Arthur stood in the winner's circle before the race in his good coat. Harris had been quietly insistent and looked at the prepared remarks his solicitor had sent over, which were gracious and appropriate, and said nothing at all. They covered the estate's history, the stable's excellence, the Duke's intentions for the future of Moreland racing, and they concluded with what Harris had described as a subtle announcement of his intention to pursue a formal engagement with a suitable candidate in the coming season. He folded them and put them in his pocket. Constellation ran in the 3rd race, and she ran the way Beatrice had said she would run, clean and fast and with the particular certainty of an animal in her best form, and she won by 2 lengths with the ease of something that had never been in question. The crowd was loud about it. Beatrice was in the back of the crowd, near the rail, in her riding habit which was her best one but was still, compared to the silk of the watching ladies, entirely practical. She had her hands on the rail and she was watching Constellation come in and her face was the open, unmanaged, entirely herself face that he saw in the stables and had seen in the shepherd's hut, and she was magnificent was the word, he thought. Not because of the silk or the setting, but because she was completely present, completely here, completely the person she was. He walked to the winner's circle. He looked at the crowd, at the county families and the tons representatives and the eligible ladies and Millicent in the stands who was watching him with the sharp, knowing attention of a woman who has arranged things and is waiting to see whether they take. He took the prepared remarks out of his pocket. He looked at them. He put them back. The Moreland stables, he said, and the crowd quieted for the Duke, because crowds quieted for Jukes, one today because of Constellation, who is an exceptional horse. She is an exceptional horse because she was identified, purchased, trained, and brought to this race by Lady Beatrice Alcott, who has managed this estate stables for 4 years with a competence and dedication that I have spent the last week discovering I cannot adequately describe. He paused. I have been the Duke of Moreland for 8 days. Lady Beatrice has been its most essential figure for considerably longer, and I would like the county to know that clearly. He looked at Beatrice. She had turned from the rail. I would also like to say, he said, and his voice was carrying and he was not reading from a document, that I came to this estate with a title I didn't ask for and 40,000 acres I didn't expect, and I have spent the last 8 days discovering that the title and the acres are, in themselves, entirely beside the point. He looked at her across the crowd. I left something here 10 years ago that was more valuable than all of it, and I had the considerable good fortune of finding it still here when I arrived, which is more than I deserved and exactly what I needed. The crowd was very quiet. Millicent, in the stands, had her hand pressed to her mouth. Lady Beatrice, he said, I am not offering you the dukedom. I am not offering you the estate or the stables or the title of Duchess, though all of those are yours if you want them. I am offering you a partnership. Of Moreland, of the stables, of everything that needs doing and building and deciding as the person who actually knows how to do all of it. He paused. And I am asking you, in front of the county, whether you will give me the chance I didn't have the courage to ask for 10 years ago. Beatrice stood at the rail with the crowd between them and her hands at her sides, and her expression was the one he had been reading for 8 days, the one that was entirely herself and entirely unmanaged. Around her, the county watched. The eligible ladies watched. Lord Harcourt watched with the expression of a man who has just understood something clearly. She came through the crowd. She came through it the way she moved through the stables, directly, without performance, without adjusting for the watching eyes. She reached him in the winner's circle with her riding habit and her sensible boots and her unpowdered hair, and she looked at him with the grey eyes that had always, he thought, seen him precisely as he was. A partnership, she said. An equal one, he said. Your decisions in the stables are final. Your opinions on the estate are required, not optional. Your name is on the records as they should have been from the start. He paused. And I will need you to continue to tell me when I'm wrong, which I expect will be regularly. You have been wrong about several things already this week, she confirmed. I expect the rate will continue. The corner of her mouth moved. You wore the good coat. Harris was very persistent. It suits you, she said, and then looked at him with the full, direct attention that he had been waiting for, the one that was not the managed professional regard of a woman briefing a duke but the actual, real, 10-year-held version that had always been underneath it. You left because you were afraid, she said. I know that now. I didn't then. I know. Don't do it again. No, he said. I won't. She looked at him for one more moment, at the man who had been knee-deep in a Shropshire ditch 8 days ago and was now standing in a winner's circle with a title and an estate and all of his calloused, practical, veterinarian self entirely intact, which was, she had always thought, the best version of him. Then she took his hand. He kissed her. He kissed her in the winner's circle with Constellation's ribbon on the post beside them and the county watching and Millicent in the stands apparently overcome, and it was not a graceful, performed, ducal kind of kiss but the real kind, certain, decided, the kind that had been 10 years in preparation and had no interest in being brief about it. The crowd had opinions. They did not care. When they broke apart, Beatrice looked at the watching faces, the county families, the eligible ladies, the tons representatives, with the mild, composed expression of a woman who has won a race and is aware of it. The stables, she said, turning back to him. The South Paddock drainage needs extending before spring. I'll look at it Monday, he said. I've already designed the plan. Of course you have. He still had her hand. He was not letting go of it. Show me. Tuesday, she said. Monday you have letters from the solicitor. Harris told you. Harris tells me everything. He's been trying to manage you for 8 days and appears grateful for the assistance. From the stands, Millicent's voice carried across the winner's circle with the carrying quality of a woman who has never needed to raise her voice because she has always been entirely certain of being heard. "It is about time," she said, to no one in particular and everyone within range. "Absolutely about time." Beatrice looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at Beatrice. "Your great-aunt," she said, "is entirely insufferable," he said. "She arranged the village inn," Beatrice said. "I know. The renovation was suspiciously convenient." "Extremely." They looked at Millicent, who raised her glass to them from the stands with the serene satisfaction of a woman who has played a long game and won it. Arthur raised his free hand back. She shook her head, pleased. They walked back toward the stables together, the Duke in his good coat and his calloused hands, and Beatrice in her riding habit with the November Stakes ribbon tucked into her pocket and mud on her hem, which was exactly as it should be, and the county watched them go, and it had quite a lot to say, and neither of them was listening. The South Paddock drainage plan was already in her notebook. He had looked at it that morning, before the race, because she had left it in the office and he had read it with the careful attention of a man reading something excellent, and he had added one note in the margin in his own hand, small, precise, a veterinary observation about the water table she had not had access to, and left it where she would find it. She had found it. She had not said anything yet. But she had brought the notebook to the race, which was not necessary, which meant she had wanted it with her, and he thought that was the kind of thing you noticed when you were paying attention, which he intended, from this point forward, to do without interruption. The stables received them with the smell of hay and horses and the particular warmth of a place that has been well kept and is well known, and Sovereign looked at them from his box with the equanimity of a horse that has survived a storm and a shepherd's hut and a winner's circle and expects nothing further to be remarkable today. Arthur opened the notebook to his margin note. The water table drops 4 feet in the northwest corner. It affects the drainage differential. "I know," she said, looking at the note. "I factored it in. Look at the second diagram." He looked. She was right. He was wrong. She watched him arrive at this conclusion, and her expression did the thing it did when she was right and knew it and was being decent about it. "The second diagram is better," he said. "Yes," she said. "I should have looked further before commenting." "You should have," she agreed. "But the observation about the water table was correct. It's just already accounted for." He closed the notebook. He handed it back. She took it. They stood in the stable aisle with Sovereign at one end and the sound of the race grounds still audible through the walls, and the life that was beginning to assemble itself around them, the stables and the estate and the partnership and the 10 years that had been survived and were now behind them, was large and complicated and entirely real. "The cottage," he said. She looked at him. "There's a farmhouse on the south boundary of the estate," he said. "I saw it in the records. It's good land. Good building." He paused. "I've been thinking about the surgery. The veterinary practice. The county needs one and I've been one for 10 years and the dukedom doesn't require me to stop." She looked at him with the expression that was not surprise but recognition. "You want to keep working." "I want to keep being useful," he said. "The title is what I am. The work is who I am. I'd like to keep both." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, with the precise care of someone choosing words that will be accurate and lasting, "You have always been more the work than the title. That is the best thing about you." He looked at her. The stable was warm and real and smelled of the right things, and she was standing in it with her notebook and her muddy hem and her riding habit, and she was 31 and entirely herself, and he had been wrong about her capacity for a long time and intended to spend the rest of his life being corrected about it, which was, he thought of a sheep in a ditch and a solicitor's letter and a road to Moorland and a Thursday afternoon and a stable door, exactly where he was supposed to be. "The South Paddock drainage," he said. "Tuesday," she said. "Tuesday," he agreed. Outside, the November Stakes crowd was dispersing into the cold afternoon, and Millicent was undoubtedly managing something, and the county had things to say about dukes and partnerships and women in riding habits, and none of it was as interesting or as real as the stables in the afternoon light, and the two people in them, beginning. He had gone to Edinburgh to become someone worth choosing. He had spent 10 years becoming very good at his work. He had become a duke by accident and a partner by intention, which was the right order, and Beatrice Alcott, who became Beatrice Pendergast on a Wednesday in January with no audience but the county vicar and Millicent and a horse named Constellation, directed the Moorland stables for the next 30 years and won 12 races in the first 5. Arthur kept the South Paddock drainage in his personal file as a record of being wrong about something important, which she found funny every time. He wore the good coat on Sundays. He wore the muddy boots every other day. Both suited him. She had always known that.